Very tasty. Yes.
Do you want to kind of maybe explain how the whole Fear Itself thing came about? Or
very simply, Tom Brevoort, a vice editor and president for life, I don't know what his title is now, called Ed Brubaker and myself last March. It's literally been more than a year that I've been working on this book that happened today, which is pretty great. But Tom said, you know, we've got a Thor movie in next May and a Cat movie in July. You guys maybe want to look for a limited, something that your schedules keep nice and gentle. You guys could both maybe co-write again, and you know, just kind of tell a fun Thor Cap story. And Ed and I talked about it for a day or two, and kind of came up with the seed of the idea that you know, Hitler was obsessed with like Norse mythology.
This video is brought to you by tfaw.com.
And that was true, but we didn't have to make that up. Like, that was just right there. So it seemed like a really obvious connection point, and we kind of very quickly came up with the seed of the idea. But had trouble with, like, how do you tell a story that starts in May and is accessible for people who come in from seeing a Thor movie, but is also just as accessible in part 3 in July when... So we had this really convoluted thing where I was going to do the present day and he was going to do the past, and he was going to do the Cap and original Red Skull, and I'd do the Bucky and Sin stuff, and the Serpent would be the common link between the two. It was this whole, like, you know, I would start in May and then he would come in July, and it was this like yoga Jenga thing that we couldn't quite get our heads around. We couldn't really talk about the story without getting hung up on that. We were kind of stuttering about it in a editorial retreat with like everybody in the room, and it was Joe Quesada who sort of looked at us in his Joe way and was like, hey, you know, fuck marketing and the schedule and all that stuff, just tell the story, because I think what you're talking about sounds like an event. And so free of having to worry about what happens in May and how does it make sense in July and all that stuff, we just like, all right, well, Odin's not the All-Father. And and suddenly, as we started to talk about how this would be a god that fed on fear and blah, 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 it just became clear how all the other pieces of the Marvel Universe would plug into it and how it could be an event. And we knew it had been a while for us. It's been, and it might not feel that way, but it's been about 2 years since any of us thought about events. And it had been a while since we kind of knew we were heading back there. It was about time to get going again. It just felt right, and we didn't know what, that's I think the nature of this particular retreat was like, what are we, do we have an event, where are we heading? And I had a little bit of my thing, and Ed had a thing, and Brian had, everybody kind of had like seeds, but nobody had a tree yet, or a plant even, or a sprout. So yeah, it just started very organically, like what if we told a Cap Thor story? And then the snowball, it was Joe freeing us from the confines of marketing. And then it sort of it very quickly became me. I think Ed's interest was really in the kind of the World War II stuff. I might be wrong. Ed would have to answer that, but it kind of became my thing, more about me and less about Ed as we got going. And yeah, and now here we are, a year later.
So does it kind of become like a, like everybody kind of goes, oh, that's his thing now, back away from it?
No, no, God, no. This has been the most read. I'm very excited. It's the first time Jeff Loeb has ever read my work, so I'm thrilled. But it's one of those things like everyone at Marvel has read it, and read it, and read it, and talked about it. And, you know, I came in at Marvel during Civil War when Mark Miller's health had kind of collapsed, and there was, like, everybody remembers when Civil War kind of hit that stopping point, and it was tough internally because everybody wanted Mark to tell his story, but had to wait for Mark's health to allow him to physically be able to write it. So just kind of knowing what that felt like my Punisher run, I wrote like issue 1, and then issue 4, and issue 5. And then issue 3, and then issue 2. Like that was the sequence of the first 5 issues of because of where Mark was. So having kind of gone through like, what's the worst case circumstance? I know, creative team member has a complete health collapse and can't write. All right, so that's the worst case scenario for these things. So like, okay, having that in my head, you know, I've tried to be ahead and as open and as sharing, so everyone is reading it. Everyone is, you know, if somebody has a note or a suggestion, I've been very open. I wanted to look like a better writer than I am. And when you've got all these different kind of voices, you know, ultimately it comes down to, you know, what me and Tom is sort of, this is what I would like to write, and Tom is ultimately the editor, and the two of us come to record, and away we go. But it's definitely been open to a lot of people. And I get a lot of input and a lot of feedback, and more importantly, reach out to other folks and want to know how I can set up everybody else, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Especially with the tie-ins, the stuff we want to do with the tie-ins not being like, well, you really should have read a book you don't care about, number 17, because that's really where the story ends. Because everybody's been through this kind of abusive publisher-reader relationships where you're tricked into reading books you don't want to read. So the idea of doing the tie-ins that grow the story but don't tell it, you know, like, so then it's like, all right, well, what can we do for Spider-Man? What can we do for this? What do you need me? How can I, you know, I was talking to Jeff Parker, are you here? Jeff? You might be here later. But like talking to Jeff, there's like a big Thunderbolts beat in the next issue. So there's a lot of like, what do you need from me? How can I get you to read the Thunderbolts and all that kind of stuff. So I suspect there's a degree of people saying stay away from him and let him do his story that I don't hear about. So I think it's all smiles and laughs. But for me, it's sort of the opposite. Like, how can I help? How can I do everything I can? Like, aside from not coming down with Crohn's disease, what can I do to make this as easy a process as possible?
I have a question. What was your inspiration for the story you did in the Captain America Who Wears the Shield?
Oh yeah, Brendan McCarthy was my inspiration. Do you guys know Brendan McCarthy? Do his work? Yeah. Brendan McCarthy did a book called Strange Days with Peter Milligan. And between Strange Days and Marvel Man, that is sort of the secret history of Western comics in the 90s, and nobody knows about it because it's been out of print since the 80s. But since the 80s, since I first saw McCarthy's work, it's been inspirational. You know, I cannot express without sounding like a complete lunatic how much I love the guy's stuff. So I just wanted to write a Brendan McCarthy story. Like, I wanted to pretend it, like I said it to Steve Wacker, the editor, I feel like I'm sending Paul McCartney like my cover of Let It Be. You know what I mean? Like, I was so trying to tell a Brendan story. Like, this is the kind of stuff you do, right? Because I don't know how to not act like you when I'm around you because I love you and I'm wearing a mask made of your skin. So I just love his stuff. I love McCarthy's stuff so much that I wanted to do something that felt like a McCarthy story. And I didn't, Steve had asked if I wanted to be a part of the book, and I was like, yeah, sure, if I figure out something clever to do, if I can figure out something funny. And he looked over at me and just said, what if McCarthy draws it? I'm like, you'll have it tomorrow. And I literally went home and wrote it like in a night. It was just this big, you know, I wanted to tell a big, funny Brandon McCarthy story about
So
you know, McCarthy-ish stuff. You know, like what would Marvel look like if Bucky died protecting James Brown or something? Which happens in the book. That's where Bucky dies protecting James Brown from assassination.
So when you write for a comic, is it similar to, say, writing for a screenplay since you have to do picture like story?
Very similar, yeah. And there are guys who actually use like the screenplay software and actually just write screenplays. That's what's called a full script, when you provide an artist with a panel breakdown and then dialogue for that panel. And then there's what's called Marvel style, where you sort of write a much more broader text outline and then go back and dialogue based on the art you get back, which I've never done. But yeah, it's very much.
Is it really hard though, since you don't know what the art, and you have an idea in your head what you think the art's going to be, but
yeah. Wait, is it hard to
write for, I don't know, or even when it gets back, it's not what you think it should look like?
Oh, there's a lot of, like, you know what I mean? I get until, I mean, Friday nights, the books go at Marvel Friday night, so I have until Friday night at like 9:30 to finish. Like, and we will tweak and retweak and rewrite according to, you're always adjusting and always reworking based on the art. And, you know, like I've worked with the guy I do Iron Man with, we've worked together at this point for almost 4 years, so there's a kind of, I know what I'm going to get, and the scripts are very much like telegrams at this point. Like, I know and he knows, and we just kind of have a relationship. But for new guys, you're kind of figuring it out and working, and I'll readjust accordingly until I sort of figure out how to
Get them to
speak
draw
that,
what you see.
like speak that language. You know what I mean? And even then, it gets revamped and reworked to the point of great annoyance. The unsung hero of Fear itself so far is Chris Eliopoulos, the letterer, who has had to do kind of top-down rewrites. Every time I get art in, I have a nervous breakdown. I'm convinced my career is over. Rewrite the entire thing, top to bottom. Chris then implements it, curses my name. So on and so forth.
You said you were from Chicago. Why did you move to Portland?
Well, I was born in Chicago, and then I moved further south in Illinois, and then I moved to Iowa, and then I moved to Kansas, and then I moved to North Carolina, then I moved around North Carolina, and then I moved back to Chicago, and then I moved back to North Carolina, and then I went to Kansas City, Missouri, and then I came to Portland. So you know what I mean? I moved around a lot.
How long have you been out here now?
Almost a year and a half.
Year and a half?
Yeah.
You're happy here?
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, cool. All right.
I'm very, I didn't know that I had a place. You know, having moved around a lot, I just sort of figured every couple of years you packed all your shit up like a pirate and went somewhere else. And, I've been in KC for a very long time, and it wasn't working, you know, and I didn't quite know what to do. So when we decided to leave, and I got out here, like, oh look, it doesn't have to be work to live in a place. You can just sort of love it naturally. So it's great. It's very great. It doesn't beat living on Sheffield, where I could just kind of walk to a Cubs game in the afternoon. I used to live right at Belmont and Sheffield, so yeah, it was, except when the drunk assholes then came back after Cubs games. But yeah, so it's great out here. I love it.
One of the things that got me really into Iron Man was the new technology stuff, specifically in the older ones, the 0-point energy, stuff like that. And then kind of in a sociological duality, one of the things that got me into Thor is the deep mythology. I'm kind of interested in what you think is kind of the future of technology, like what excites you in the world of the real, like right now, that's happening either in fringe science or technology, and then what is kind of your history theologically, like, or historically, like where do you get that background with Thor and whatnot?
I was sort of always into superheroes, be they, you know, sword and sandal or hammer and, you know, it is just sort of myth, always kind of myths and legends, and that stuff was always sort of what I was into. So I mean, I've long been, it was weird, I wasn't a big fan of the Thor comics until very recently, but mythology stuff was always kind of vaguely in my wheelhouse. What excites me technologically, that everybody, I just learned sort of had a real lesson in resiliency, where I had a hard drive that failed so badly it took 2 archives down with it, and then I had a mechanical failure on the 3rd drive that just decided I'm 4 years old, I'm going to stop working when you plug me in today, and lost about 15 years worth of data. Just gone. And it's not like, oh, you should back up. Oh, I backed up. I backed up hourly, but I was doing the same thing. And redundancy is not the same as resiliency, so like doing the same thing 3 times is not the same thing as doing 3 different things to the same end. So now I've got 2 different drives and backing up to 3 clouds and da-da-da, because like, I don't have anything. I don't have Ed Brubaker's wife still had the scans of my kid's sonogram. So I got that from Ed's wife. Like that's it, it's gone, family photos, everything, gone. Just, So the cloud is interesting. That everyone's like, oh sure, the cloud. We'll just go to the cloud. It's the cloud. Save it to the cloud. You want a cloud? Have a cloud. You buy a book on Amazon, you get a cloud. Like, that's gonna end so badly for so many different reasons. Today, an old woman in Lithuania was stealing copper and cut the wrong cable, and Lithuania went off the internet today. All of it gone. An entire country dark, right? Great, send it to the cloud. What could possibly go wrong with the cloud? So that's really trying to figure out what's going to go wrong with the cloud. That is a lot of fun for me.
Does that do the scalable energy? That's one of the things that excites me the most in technology. Is sort of everything that can get someone to scale technology.
Yeah, I like the idea of energy sort of approaching the now Sturgeon's law is that everything's shitty. What's the law about bigger and cheaper with memory? That as it gets bigger, it's getting cheaper. You know, there's a graph where you can try. Somebody's law, whatever. It's that's I look at geopolitical implications of getting away from fossil fuels and stuff. that's really neat. But really, just from a, what am I going to write about? Well, the cloud. What happens? How do you make the cloud sick? What happens when the cloud doesn't talk to you back? What happens when the cloud decides it wants another cloud? You know, I just kind of, the cloud, just put all your shit in an imaginary force field that someone somewhere promises you will be okay. What could possibly go wrong? So back your stuff up.
Now you did Five Fists of Science.
Yes.
Are you going to do anything else along that?
Maybe I had sort of an idea, but I don't. One day, we'll see.
Someday.
I have too much other stuff that I haven't gotten a chance to do. So I want to start doing sequels at this point. But I would very much. It's always fun writing Mark Twain and Nikola Tesla.
Tesla.
Always a good time.
Who haven't you written that you want to write?
Many people. Life is long, and there is all kinds of stuff to do. I don't like asking that question, or like, what book do you want to do? Because I always feel like it suggests that whoever is doing it currently, I could do it. I think that I could do it better, you know, or that I have a problem with the way it's being done now. But so I always try to be clever, dodge being too explicit with that answer. But you know, the toy boxes are big. They're full of a lot of cool stuff.
Yeah, how would you describe the story? What is it basically about?
Talking about my fear itself?
For yourself, yeah.
That Odin, the sort of god of gods amongst the Norse pantheon, isn't in fact the end-all be-all, and has this sort of dark secret that no one knows about, and the entire Norse creation myth and the story of who and what Odin is isn't necessarily the truth. And all hell breaks loose when the truth starts to come out. And it creates this deity, much like Odin, who feeds on fear, and the more that people are afraid of him, the stronger he gets, and the more powerful he gets. And so this guy basically goes about resurrecting an army of 8, and together the 9 of them wage war on the earth. And so you've got Captain America having to fight a world war again, and you've got Thor having to deal with everything he knows being possibly untrue to some degree or the other. At a moment when people are at each other's throats and no one has any money and everyone's afraid and TV is full of screaming people and, you know, stuff like that. You have to get your balls touched at the airport, and life is feels particularly fearful right now. So a god that provokes and evokes that gets loose and makes us pay for everything. It's the short version. Somebody over here?
What books are you reading now, like this?
Like comics or
Comics. What are you reading for fun? Or for work, just yourself?
I really like Hickman stuff and Remender stuff, and Ultimate Spider-Man remains terrific. Zach Soda's Study Group 12 I just read and like really adored that. Anything that Hernandez brothers write. I'm excited to see the new Chester Brown book when it comes out. I've been rereading a lot of old Neil Adams comics. Because I find him so interestingly nuts, and I think he's been interestingly nuts for a very long time. And so, like, to go back and look at, I've been looking at a lot of old Neil Adams stuff, and gosh, what else? I have 2 kids, so it's kind of catch as catch can, you know. Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff right now. It's not, you know, it's not easy to. Every week I tend to come back with more stuff that I don't have time to get through. But it's been, Benjamin, you know Benjamin Mora's stuff? He's great. Yes, seek it out. Yeah, and rereading like Marvel Man and stuff like that. Excuse me? Stuart Immonen? He's great and makes me look way smarter than I actually am, which is cool. I will take credit for it. I've been a fan of his for a very, very long time. You know, I deeply love his work and have forever. And I'm always embarrassed when I'm around him, and I always feel clumsy and dumb and try to keep my mouth shut and not make eye contact. He's great. Everything that is in my head, he does better. You know, and is a giant, you know. And I hope that this, like, I hope everybody loves him as deeply and weirdly as I love him after this is done. I'm trying to write what I think is like the ultimate Stuart Immonen comic, you know, until he and Catherine, his wife, go off and he makes like another small, quiet graphic novel, and you discover there's actually an entirely other Stuart Immonen that you never knew existed, you know. No, I'm really happy, and I think it looks great. So, again, he just makes me look better.
You kind of. Sorry. No, go ahead.
Since you and Brian, since both you and Brian Michael kind of just live in Portland, do you guys just like hang out all the time and have?
Our kids, yeah, all the time, actually. Yeah. And our kids are very close. They're very close in age too, and they are good friends. So we are, if nothing else, bonded by our children. But yeah, no, and but I mean, there's a million people here. That's the thing. Is like, there's so many people in town. Like the publisher. I mean, I was like, whenever I've gotten on an airplane to go to a convention, and I always think like, oh man, the mid-list is in trouble if this plane goes down. It's nuts. I mean, we moved here and realized we had more friends here than we did in Kansas City, where like I had been for 11 years. You know what I mean? So it's a huge community. Remender and I are very tight. It's a great place. Rucka and Jen Van Meter out here, and Oni. I was just out at Dark Horse last week, and I mean, there's just a lot of comics out here. So it's great to kind of, as solitary a gig as this can be, like to have a social network, pardon the expression, you know, of other people kind of living the same life is great. It's a great advantage. And it's a very diverse kind of comics. It's not like half of Marvel's is out here. There's a very diverse spread of stuff. So it's great. And the stores are good too, which I don't know if you guys realize. like in the way that you kind of take a natural resource for granted when you're around it every day. Like you have no idea what it's like to live in a town that has a wealth of stores of this high caliber. It is it's great to be able to actually go to a comic shop like that has stuff that you want and stuff you've never heard of and has like involved, invested readers working the counter. We're like, have you read this? Have you read that? Instead of, you know, that fucking Android's Dungeon or whatever that passes for acceptable so often. And you had one.
Oh, I was just gonna ask if Stuart's art kind of changed the way you wrote issues that were further out ahead, like once you started getting pages back, were you like, now I know I can do this sort of thing?
The not to sound like I'm, you know, patting myself on the back, but I've been such a fan of his for so long. If anything, I've just realized I didn't need to tell him. I didn't need, the scripts are getting shorter, you know, because I don't need to, he gets it. I don't need to tell him how to do his job. You know, I've been such a fan of his for so long. I felt like I knew, I could just kind of see what it would look like in my head, and I just had to describe it all. And I've kind of realized, well, wait, he's going to see it in his head too, but he'll see it even better than I do, so I don't need to go through and he'll do it, he'll take care of it, and he does, and it's great. So if anything, it's gotten easier to write for him, because I realize I don't have to say as much. I can just sort of shut up and let him do his thing. He does it quite well.
So you have these characters like Iron Man, and you also go along with Drew Baker, the Iron Fist, this 27 one. This was run, whatever it was. 16. It was around Civil War. Yeah. You've taken these characters and kind of made them relevant again over years. Because Iron Fist wasn't relevant really until
To you.
he was a favorite. So when you're given these characters 30, 40 years of history, and you're set to write a story, how do you go about separating the good from the bad and kind of making everybody happy?
You're never ever gonna make everybody happy.
Right.
And I'm sure there are people who are like giant fans of the alien broccoli people that Iron Fist, you know, used to work for, that are angry that we never did the broccoli people story. Right. Like the Broccoli People of Kunlun story never came out. Like I'm sure there are people who are pissed off that somehow we have, disrespected the legacy of what the character was all about. I sort of think our job is a little bit like deep sea salvage. When you do stuff like that, like scrape off the barnacles and clean it up and polish it up, and we're not gonna. If it's a character that Iron Fist is a great example. You're not going to make it better than it already was. You're just going to remind people why you love it. So all I ever felt like I could do is just sort of try to remind people why I loved it, and not, if you can avoid it, not deliberately or blatantly disrespect or contradict what's come before, and not crap all over somebody's favorite comic about the alien broccoli people of Kunlun, but just sort of not talk about it if it's tough to get through. You know what I mean? Sort of don't contradict it, but just don't address it, and remind people why this thing being allowed to bring up from the briny deep was so great. And like it's Kung Fu Billionaire. It's not rocket science. Like it's right there. It just seems sort of like, oh well, I think maybe there should be a lot of Kung Fu, and he should be super rich. There you go. And then, Ed was like, we should do Enter the Dragon. Like, yes, we'll do a Kung Fu tournament story, and we'll do a bracket. For God's sake, a bracket, a Kung Fu tournament with a bracket. It seemed, like I said, it's just like, look, we dug up an airplane. Let's, scrape the barnacles off and remind people what it looked like when it flew.
Have you heard any word from Will Wheaton, Storm, or anything about another Woodstock?
San Diego. I know there's going to San Diego. I don't know if they're going to do it. I'm sure they'll do a tour eventually, but I know San Diego is the first of the 3.0 versions. Last I heard. So I talked to Paul and Storm like a week ago, 2 weeks ago, right before their show out here. So I know one's coming to San Diego.
When did you know that you'd be killing Cable?
It was, I guess, when we explicitly knew for sure. I mean, it was always kind of in the cards.
Okay.
We knew when we kind of talked about what came after Messiah Complex. We knew that this could possibly be a story where Cable dies. We sort of had that, we don't know where we're going to go, but that could be a possible thing that happens. So it was at least a question mark since Messiah Complex, but it wasn't until we had the retreat where we really explicitly broke out Second Coming into its 12 parts that we knew this is happening. And that was the meeting where Nightcrawler was chosen as well. Like it was that came out of the blue. That was the thing that came up in that room. That wasn't like a trajectory or anything like that. But it was we knew when we knew what we wanted to do with, or rather when we knew that when we would know what we wanted to do with Hope, we would know what would happen to Cable. So I guess that would have been then 2 summers ago.
So are you going to kill how many characters in this figure itself?
All of them.
Oh, cool.
At the end, there's no one left.
Wow.
Everybody's crying. It's great. Big downer ending. Folks won't be coming out of the other side. But then it's comics,
I'll bring back life later. Something relating back.
It's not the question isn't are they going to die, but it's how are they going to get out of it,
When you guys are in the big writing, how do you guys decide what aspects of the huge continuity do you focus on and pull from? And with 40, 60 years of writing, there's some things you kind of almost have to forget about for this particular stretch of storytelling.
Yeah.
How do you guys make the decision on what you guys are focusing on, what you guys, well, we can't really use that as like a story-by-story basis, what works for this story, and pick and choose? What's that process like?
It's very case by case. It all sort of depends on what's the story now and why are you telling it, and what happens and who do they fight and what do we get, and then it kind of grows out of there. It's sort of like Joe saying, don't worry about marketing, tell your story. You know, and so when you tell your story, then you kind of see contextually what happens and where it goes, and if you need to have somebody explain something away, or you know what I mean, it's very catch as catch can. And then there are times where, like, there are writers like I think Greg Pak does it really artfully, where he can kind of dance between raindrops and this. I don't know, it just boggles my mind how he can see the entire board of the Marvel Universe. A Slott is pretty good at that too, and just kind of find the space to weave around and sort of how he's going to do his thing. And then there are guys like Ed and I who just sort of like, we won't talk about the broccoli people. You know, we're not going to say they're not there, but we'll just don't talk about the broccoli people, move forward, that kind of stuff. So it's very case by case. And there's also, you know, everybody is like a super fan in the room, and if not of the entire thing, although Tom Brevoort tends to have like 93 to 95% of the Marvel Universe in his head at all times. So, you know, there tends to be a very, if you're doing something that's going to be a big continuity no-no, someone in that room will know. Or if you're doing a story that has been done, someone in that room will ping you and say, we've already done that, and it was this, and it worked or it didn't work. And then you decide, is it worth doing again? Are you doing it better? Are you doing it different? Why tell it now? Et cetera, et cetera. So, that's always where it gets super heated. When you have somebody who's like, no, that story absolutely matters. Like, you are stupid. That is the dumbest story in the universe. You're the only person, you and Wikipedia are the only people that remembers it, and I hate you. No, I hate you. How dare you disrespect the greatest, you know, broccoli people story ever told? And you get into it, and you scream and yell, and, you know, your brain gets really hot, and then you go out to dinner, and you laugh about it. But it's sort of like every conversation I've ever had in my life about comics, only now I get to have them. So it's pretty awesome.
When you're deciding, like, their treatment, when you decide to kill, like, where you guys decide Nightcrawler was one of the ones that died, do you kind of also think of, well, how will they be resurrected later?
Yeah, oh no, I planted that seed. I planted that seed in the next issue. No one's got it. But the next issue, I can tell you how, well, and now I'm not even on like the Xverse anymore, so maybe they have somebody else has some another idea, but literally the next issue, the clue for how and where and why and what the story is literally the next issue. So you have to kind of, I always think it's a fight between like writer me and fan me. And when the bit came, it was the end of the first act, and the stakes needed to get elevated so everyone knew this wasn't just a chase story. And all the reasons that we realized somebody should die here saving this girl. And Nightcrawler came up, like, reader me was like, no, he's the best, first off. 2, you're stupid. 3, shut up. But writer me was like, oh God, oh, it just like, it works. And everybody in the room was like, whoa. And we're like, all right, well, we're a bunch of the most jaded, angry, bitter, cynical jerks in the universe. And if all of us are like taking a moment, like, because it like hits you in the gut, like maybe there's something powerful there that's worth exploring. But then writer me comes back and it's like, all right, but here's how you can come back. And it's quietly put there. And I told Kieran, when Gillen got the book, I let him know, all right, listen, here's the Nightcrawler seed. Do as thou will. And, you know, maybe one day he'll come back. If he does, I can show you where. I can show you the. But yeah, so it's that kind of constant argument between. But when you get a room full of guys who live and breathe this stuff all the time, needing a moment to like process something, like you're like, all right, that's really powerful. If it gets us, like I think we should do it. It's worth exploring. So you have to kind of keep fan you muzzled and taped inside a long box. You can write angry posts about yourself on the internet later. I blew it again. Man. 0 stars. You laugh, but
What is your favorite X-Men story growing up, and is it different for fan you versus writer you?
yes. Yes. I think it's a little bit like Saturday Night Live. Like the first cast of SNL you watch is always the best. The current one always sucks, and it's had ups and downs ever since. Like it is the same kind of thing. It doesn't matter where you come. Everybody has that. I came in at 200. The first like crossover that I lived through was the Mutant Massacre. That remains the high watermark for me as reader me. Like that is it. It was never that good. It was never better. It was all downhill after that. And then like Nick Lowe, who came sort of in that next wave, that post-Claremont era, for him it's like, no, Sugarman, we'd fight about Sugarman. Bring Sugarman back in. You're an idiot. He's the stupid, we would fight over Sugarman. But Nick is like, no, he's the best, and I'm like, he's the worst. So yeah, it is very different. As reader me, that was definitely a high watermark. As writer me, the earlier stuff, even though I think it's crude by today's standards of storytelling, when those issues, like when the Claremont Burn issues and the Claremont Cockrum issues those were 17 pages. 17 pages. It was phenomenal, the amount of world building and character and stuff that they accomplished in 17 pages. And a big influence on Casanova, when I started to do Casanova. I was like, look what you can do with 17 pages. And Casanova started off at 16 pages. So I was like, all right, well, that's not a limitation. You don't have to do short stories. You can build worlds in this, because look what Claremont and Byrne did with 17 pages. So writer me is really in awe of that 17-page era of X-Men. So just everything, nearly everything that the X-Men have done ever since has been based on that. And I fight anyone who says different. Yes, sir.
Is there a non-Marvel character that you really like to see speak in?
Would I really like to see what?
A non-Marvel character you'd really like to have an extended run like you had with Iron Man and X-Men?
Oh, sure.
This is like the top one or two.
On the spot.
Lots. No, again, it's the same sort of thing. Like, I don't want to suggest that somebody who's doing it now is doing it wrong. But life is long, and there's a lot of fun to be had. So, yeah.
Have you always just been a writer?
I wanted to be an astronaut for a while, but I'm really bad at math, and I had an understanding at a very young age that I'm literally too bad at math to be an astronaut. Like, it's a big kind of thought for a kid to have. Like, oh, I have to put that dream on a shelf. It's sort of like, I can't do math. I'm not going to be able to be an astronaut. It's not just a matter of having the suit. You need to be able to do math, and I'm not going to be able to do it. I just knew very early not going to happen. So, yeah, I've always kind of told stories in some form or fashion.
You were an artist before you
I actually started on doing it in an art school. I got into film school and I got into animation, and I've always been in or around comics and reading comics, and used to make like big comics, just sort of on my own, but we call them movies, and like dot matrix paper, and I would bind them together with yarn, and they were 40, 50-page movies on paper that I would loan out at school like a librarian and keep track of who had what. All kinds of. Yeah, so it's sort of once I got rid of that astronaut bullshit, it was all onwards and upwards for me.
How relevant for individuals who are trying to get into the industry? How relevant to have
background
to be an artist or a writer? Is it one without the other, or you need both?
No, I think it's more of a. I'm not sure I understand the question.
So
you use different words.
So if you're just a writer, you're not an artist. You want to get into the understand the industry.
Sure. Oh no, it's. I mean, I have found the best way to break in is to produce your own work on an independent level, whether that's a webcomic or a physical book. It's just going to be easier for editors to catch the sound of your voice if you're speaking in the tone with which you wish to be paid to speak. I did it like that, and it was. I was also producing like film and animation stuff, and that tended to work as writing samples too. But getting your voice out and showing proof of concept, if you will, I think is very important. So I think working with an artist is probably, versus like you could have a great pitch or a great script and several scripts of writing samples versus an actually made comic. I suspect the actually made comic would get you noticed quicker, or perhaps more favorably than just the scripts. I suspect. If nothing else, you'll start learning on the job. Start kind of learning how to do what you do and how to then rewrite for an artist based on the art you get back and all that kind of stuff. So I would suggest, were you to follow my path, then that would be a part of it, like hooking up with artists and doing indie stuff, around the hours of your day job, and sort of learning how to do it and giving finished work to editors and stuff.
what imprint is the is Casanova printed up?
Icon from
Under Marvel's Icon.
It's we're doing. It was at another publisher, and we've been doing reprints of the previous stuff, and then the new issues start in September. And the 4th issue is out next week, I think. I think the last of the reprints is out next week. Yeah, I hope. I sent it off to press a long time ago. It better be out next week. So I'm gonna get a piece of my mind.
Do you notice that there's a difference or change in the comic industry since the transfer of media that comics have had over the past, I guess, decade or so, going to movies and things like that? Is there more pressure to make more, any pressure, I guess, at all to make like a Hollywood ending or have things sort out so that they can be wrapped up in the movie or something?
I have not experienced it. Many people have. I've been very lucky. But I know a lot of people have. The problem is when it costs you $5 grand, $8 grand to produce a little magazine that can later be turned into a piece of IP that makes $1 billion at the box office worldwide, because people notice you. Well, wait a second, why aren't we doing more of these? Why do we have more of these things? Why are we turning more of these things into movies? Why is that $1 billion? What's that franchise about? What happens there? What? No, there can't be a gay superhero, brr. You know, like that kind of suddenly, and I hear stories about that, like people are starting to get notes. And I think you can see the indie press especially, I think you can see publishers gambling on printing unproduced screenplays rather than comics. You know, and I think it's slutty. Anywho, I have been very fortunate. Others haven't. So yeah, it's clearly just anytime there's that much money involved, yeah, you're gonna get notes. You're gonna get shit from people. Like that much money is just at the end of the day, when you know we're as many copies of our books are being stolen as are being sold, and paper prices are up, and the economy is down, and everything else. Like, yeah, no, people are going to start betting on sure bets, and that's what they think, is that you don't know why such and such made $1 billion worldwide, because it's a sure fucking bet, right? And that means, you know, the comic starring, you know, the African American lesbian superhero is going to get reworked to be a white guy, because that's what makes $1 billion movies. And you're going to start, and people start to get those notes, and I am sure it's a matter of time, you know, before they come for me, but it's a thing. I've started to hear from people. And that's sort of the mindset now. It's like, we've got to make movies. Movies on paper. Oh, HBO comics.
Speaking of movies, what do you think of the upcoming X-Men First Class movie?
I have no particular thoughts. A blank slate.
Have you seen Thor?
No, but I am going to the premiere, so I'm very excited.
Cool.
I get to walk on a red carpet with my special lady and hobnob with the rich and powerful, and schlep back to a hotel and change diapers and all that. I'm excited. No, I've heard very good things, so I'm excited.
Having an artistic background yourself, do you think that makes it easier or more difficult to work with artists when you're trying to depict a story?
I'm sure I think it makes it easier, and I'm sure artists think it makes me more of a pain in the ass. Because it makes me think that, I'm one of you, I know how to speak your language. This is how I see. I'm sure, I don't think I call shots as much as I do. I'm sure I am calling shots all the time. So there's a degree of experience that I'm sure has helped me along, but I suspect I'm much more of a pain in the ass than I want to admit. Batman's pretty cool. You gotta get that.
I was just wondering, now that you're not going to be on Uncanny X-Men, if there's any other details that you plan on paying for?
Yeah, there'll be one after Fear itself.
Good job.
And I'm also looking to get some more creator-owned stuff up and going. Sort of being at ground zero of the Marvel universe, I'm like, all right, I am ready to make up my own stuff. I am ready to do the African American lesbian story that will not be $1 billion blockbuster. I am ready to do quiet stuff, different stuff. So hopefully, yeah, I know what my next big Marvel gig will be, and then I know a bunch of creator-owned stuff that I can get going.
Any idea what you'll see that stuff?
As soon as I can get it done, really. I thought I was going to be done with Fear Itself a month ago, so water seeks its own level, I guess.
Did you find that because you were kind of heading up the event that you were kind of inundated with a lot of questions as to
No, I suspect Tom Brevoort has like I kind of imagine, you know, those like those outfits that like the guys that get golf balls off of driving ranges have to wear so they don't get hit. Like that's how I kind of imagine Tom on a daily basis. I believe I've been sheltered from that, so I think, oh, it's easy, it's a breeze. I just say blah blah blah, no, it's very quiet, very easygoing. And I suspect Tom has been beleaguered and inundated by it all. I get occasional questions that sort of only I can answer, but for the most part, it's I suspect Tom is taking the brunt of that damage. He has this very intimidating Excel spreadsheet that he sends out. It gets bigger every time he sends it. So I know there are conversations I'm not a part of, and suddenly there's things happening. So it's all Tom. God bless him.
Speaking of movies, do you get to retain any intellectual property rights in the transfer of movie?
There's you're talking about like with Marvel stuff?
Yeah, like for, say, Thor or Iron Man, or is that just too big of branding to leave?
It's sort of case by case. It depends. Yeah, it's case by case. But there is a form to fill out when things are created. There's a whole process. There's a thing in place for that stuff. Like I got paid to consult, like on Iron Man 2. That was cool. I got to go out and talk to those guys when they were trying to figure out what Iron Man 2 was going to be and stuff like that. So there's a yes, there is. Don't ask me to explain it or articulate it because I'm not that bright, but there are lawyers working very hard to make sure it all happens. I'm sure. No, I think. Is that it? We good?
Yeah. Anybody have any more questions? Or it's almost 8 o'clock. Let's get the signing. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much.
Brought to you by Tfal.com, the world's best online retailer of comics and collectibles. Whatever you're into, we've got just the thing for your collection.